Okay, right, let's have a look at the raid on Entebbe. Is that the way you pronounce it, Sean?
Entebbe indeed, yes.
Right, okay, right. So I'm with Sean of the Bunker, who's presenting this game. What's going on here, Sean?
Well, it's a game of the raid on Entebbe in June 76, I believe it was. And it's basically the Israelis landed on Entebbe with the Hercules transport, and they had to rescue some hostages, which were taken hostage by elements of the Bader-Meinhof group and the PLO. And Idi Amin, as role of negotiator, was basically on the side of the hostages. So he wasn't really negotiating, he was holding them there. So the battle takes place between the Israeli paras, stroke special forces, the terrorists, the terrorist demise, and a lot of Ugandan soldiers actually get shot in the process. 20 miles down the road is Kampala, and there's a big Ugandan barracks there. But Idi Amin at this time is out of the country addressing the heads of African nations or something similar. He doesn't trust his troops. He might be a coup, so he disarms them. But of course the Israelis don't know this. There's also squadrons of MiGs, 21s, etc. The Israelis have to destroy them, because if you rescue the hostages, take off, and they come up, you're going down again. They may not have any fuel, but of course the Israelis don't know that. Another interesting fact with it is they had Sherman tanks here that Idi Amin, one of the last uses of. I think he attacked Tanzania with them later on. But he actually bought them off the Israelis. And the Israelis designed the airport, so they had the plans for it. There's the old airport and the new terminal. After the raid, excuse me, which I think one Israeli soldier died, some were wounded, and I think maybe a couple of actual hostages died. Lots of Ugandans died, and all the terrorists died. But after the raid, the Israelis rang up Idi Amin and thanked him for his help, because he knew nothing about it. When he did find about it, the next day he rang back and congratulated the Israeli premier on such a successful military operation, but said, why did you have to ruin my beautiful airport in the process, because they have destroyed the control tower. So, as a player game, there's a dispute about whether there was 3 or 4 Herculeses, but it works better as a 4-player game, 1 per thing. One has 2 short wheelbase Land Rovers and a Mercedes, which is a copy of Idi Amin's Mercedes, which the Israelis got, to confuse the guards. They just thought he'd come back early. But the others have an APC and a Jeep and a squad of paras. So one has to rescue the hostages, one has to secure the gatehouse, the other one has to destroy the MiGs, and the third one has to take out the new control tower so there can't be any more communications. We point out to the players, it's not a holiday in Entebbe. You go in there, the quicker you do it, the better. So, on the rules, there's a random chart for Ugandans appearing. So, like on turn 1, it's 12 on a D12, some will come, and then 11 next, and so on. And they can come in the form of infantry, light infantry, armoured infantry, or tanks.
Okay. Tell us a bit about the models and stuff you've got going on. The Hercules, really.
Well, it's my rules of wargaming. Number 2 is 20th century 20mm, which looks a lot here, but it definitely works well. It works perfect for this because obviously the models are either Italieri or Airfix for the Hercules. I think the plane is Italieri. Other manufacturers, you've got a lot of Hornby Railway stuff with some of the buildings. The one that's out of scale is the control towers. That's actually scale-electric. If you put that big tower on the end, it would go across your runway. Cut it down and put in double doors in 20mm, so it worked. But I kept the green glass because I thought the look was right, and you want big imposing for a control tower. The actual terminal building, the lounge, is 2 Swiss railway stations back to back, 20mm.
And how about the figures?
The figures, there's a lot of the old Platoon 20 and FAA Israeli paras. The Africans, again, a lot of Platoon 20 and various other makes in there. But there are figures of actual airport staff and that dotted in there. The hostages are, I think. Hella and some of the plastic companies. Hostages again, that sort of, all those sort of ranges, modern ranges. Vehicles, well, there's a lot of toys on here, actual toy vehicles, and then you've got resin tanks, you've got metal, so the typical wargamer mix of stuff. Right now the Airfix control tower put into the things.
It looks very good, and those Hercules particularly set it off.
They do, yeah. Because I mean, obviously runways, there's not meant to be anything else on, But obviously, so you can't just dot anything, but you can put on obviously service vehicles. So you need all that sort of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And
yeah, right. Well, great.
No, that's good, Dan.
Thanks very much, Sean. That's great. Thanks for showing us around. Right, so this next table is being presented by the Grimsby Wargames Society, and I've got Mal Taylor here, who was behind some of the construction, or all of the construction, was it?
No, it was a joint effort, mainly three of us.
Yeah. Okay, and what game are you playing to start with?
Well, it's 1943 Russian front, when the Germans eventually got permission to retire across the River Dnieper. To create a new front. It didn't go well for them, and this is a caricature of the events of that time.
Okay.
The Germans fortified all the towns that they could and put rear guards in them to delay the Russians, which are coming on from over there. So it turns into quite a scramble to get across this river.
Okay. And what rules are you? Is it your own rules or?
Well, we use an adaptation of rapid fire mainly.
Okay, right.
The air rules are our own homegrown, which are quick and simple to use.
Yeah. What about the figures? Who's the manufacturer of the figures?
Well, the figures are mainly Pendraken, but there's quite a few vehicles from other manufacturers. Pithead, for instance, they're excellent. But the majority on this board are Pendraken.
And how about the buildings? Are they scratch built or pre-bought?
Well, they're all scratch built barring one which has been chopped down and converted. But the cinema, that was a joint idea that we had.
I know, obviously that's quite a striking feature, the cinema. That looks great.
Yeah. Andy here, he downloaded some German propaganda films, and that sparked the idea of creating a cinema. Right. But it's to give it credibility. That's the aid station, so all the wounded are sat watching a film while the battle raging. Right. Okay. What's in there then? What is obviously some kind of small screen, isn't it? No, it's an iPhone. iPhone, is it? Oh, yeah. Right, okay. Yeah. So that building houses an iPhone. Yeah. Right. Okay. Great. And I mean, some really lovely detail, like the bridge there that's broken. Again, is that something that you've made yourselves? Yeah, everything is virtually scratch built, really. Yeah. Even the trees are scratch built. Are they? Right. And the track, is that a recognised railway scale track? Yeah, it's O gauge. Yeah. We've got a few trains wrecked and. Yeah, they all look really neat. Yeah. So, are you going to be playing it? Yeah, we play it as much as we can because although we're tucked away in a corner, in the past we've had that many people come and they want to talk to you. Yeah. You can't actually play it to its full extent. So what we tend to do is play the air war part, which you can stop and start at any time. I see, well, it's a fantastic looking game. I love the neat crispness of it all. It does look great. And the cinema obviously adds something a little bit special. Yeah, and the flickering burning buildings with the flickering ADs. And it doesn't show too well, but even the Stuka coming out of the sky has got a light in it. Yes. Yes, it's very good. Yeah. Thanks a lot for bringing it. So now we're with Steve from the League of Extraordinary Kriegspielers. We're going to have a look around this marvellous looking table, but first of all we'll just find out what's going on here.
Well, this is one of the most obscurest and bizarrest moments of real history in the 20th century. After the First World War, Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, found himself through accident the leader of the free world because all the old empires were either destroyed or exhausted. And as part of that, he decided to remake the world in his own order, and he was from Scottish Presbyterian stock, so he had a very high set of moral principles. So he decided, in his infinite wisdom, that Fiume, this obscure port on the Adriatic Sea, was going to be an independent state, number one, and he had big plans for it to be the home city of the League of Nations, number two, which is, as you know, he founded the League of Nations even though he couldn't convince the Americans to join it. So what happened when this was announced was it all really kicked off in the region because everybody in the region thought this was a terrible idea. So you had Italians who thought that it should be Italian because 80% of the population was Italian. You had Slav nationalists who decided this was part of the greater Yugoslavia and shouldn't be an independent state. You had Austro-Hungarian and German nationalists thinking, well, this was a part of Austro-Hungary, we want to keep it part of Austro-Hungary. And then watching from the sidelines was a League of Nations multinational force comprising of the British and the French, who eventually got involved after an Italian poet and former Arditi, like a kind of assault infantryman from the First World War, a guy called Gabriele D'Annunzio, seized the city in Christmas 1920 and declared an independent republic. Then it got interesting because when he so this was all going on. He seized the city, and then the place just descended into complete craziness. He was a kind of cocaine addict and a drunkard, and so he spent most of the time out of it. The place was notorious for fast living, and all the time all these different powers were circling. So that was the real history of it. But what we've done is done a bit of a mash-up to get more forces involved. So in reality it was only the Italians, D'Annunzio's lot, and the French who got involved, but we've brought in German nationalists, we've brought in Slavic nationalists, we've got Italian regular forces, and we've got a French intervention force coming in here, and we've got the actual city-state forces of Fiume at the moment. So the game is basically, there are 6 objectives in the game, each marked by a flag. It all starts off in Fiume government control, but what's happened here at the moment is that Slavs have taken the radio station, the Germans have taken the police headquarters, and it's all kicking off.
At this point, are we about halfway through the game?
Yeah, probably, but just under halfway through the game, I reckon. I think we're in the move 6. I think we'll probably get 14 moves done by the end of the day.
Okay, just tell us a bit about the scenery. One of those striking things are these rocky outcrops or bluffs.
Yes.
Is that a one-piece thing? Or?
Yeah, these were commissioned nearly 20 years ago, actually, from Gary Chalk.
Oh, right.
Yeah. There's a legend name from the past. Because I started doing Back and Beyond when Mark Cobblestone brought out the initial range in 2002-2003, and I was living in Italy at the time. And I commissioned. I managed to get a hold of Gary, hard man to get a hold of, and he created all the base scenery here, all the tiles and the rocky outcrops. Since then, over the last 20 years, we've obviously added to it. Gary's done some stuff. He did this beautiful Northern Star building, which is the newspaper office out of the Man Who Would Be King movie. And then most recently, Jeff Lacey from Purple Line Terrain, he's built this beautiful Adriatic coastal fort and those walls and this bastion and that Martello tower. So I've added to it's my main focus in Wargaming is Back and Beyond, and it provides it's endless fun, and because it's not that well known, you don't get too many rules lawyers saying, oh, that didn't do that. So and what you've got at the end of the First World War, I love moments in history where things are changing, and after the First World War lots of things change, obviously, Russian Revolution, etc. So you've got all this going on in the world. You've got enough modern kit, but it's not dominated by kit, so it's still old-fashioned infantry tactics that generally rule the way.
What about that ship?
That ship, yeah. There's a very interesting story with that. This fellow over here, Jonathan Driver, this is about 18 years old, and he'd just been made redundant. So being a practical family man, he spent a large part of his redundancy money getting this handmade out of wood. And the funniest thing was we were living in Northamptonshire at the time, and he said, I've got something coming up from Portsmouth. And he said, what is it? He said, I can't tell you. And a knock comes on the door, and a taxi comes up from Portsmouth with this. It's the Pochemkin. It's based on the Pochemkin plans. This 3-foot wooden, it's really heavy, handmade Pochemkin. Now it's getting a bit tired after 18 years. It's due for a refurb. But although it was originally the Pochemkin, we use it in a variety of guises. So for this game, it's the French battleship, the Lorraine, which is providing offshore fire. Now, in reality, it'd be miles offshore, but it's too good a toy not to have on the table.
Definitely, yeah. And how about the figures? Are they mainly cobblestone?
No, they're a mixture. They originally started cobblestone, but there's the French are largely gripping beast. They're mostly gripping beasts from their Woodbine range. The Italians are mostly Empress. Then most of the Slavs and the irregulars are mostly cobblestone. The Germans are a mix of Empress, the Suba miniatures, German Revolution figures, and some cobblestones in there. So my original collection was 100% cobblestone, but there's so many other people have brought out ranges now, and we just kind of so it's a mixture.
All right, okay. Well, thanks very much for showing us around today. That's great. So yes, hope you're enjoying looking at the pictures because it is a fabulous looking game.
Oh, thank you.
Probably the most striking one here.
Oh, I haven't managed to get away from the table, so
no,
I don't know.
Well, I'll let you go now.
Right, thank you.
Cheers,
right.
Thank you. Right, so I'm with Mark now from the York Wargames Society, and we're looking at a big battle of what's this?
The fall of York in 866 AD, back when the Vikings first took York from the Saxons.
Okay, and so it's a historical event.
It is,
yeah?
yes. And then 3 months later, the Saxons came back and tried to take it. And there was another, and they tried to invade it as well. So it's a two-sided. You can do it both ways.
I see. Right. Well, it's good that you've got some local interest. Not that you're short of things to do around York, are you? Really?
Well, it's representing like the Minster is where the old Roman headquarters was.
Yeah.
And then you've got the octagonal tower, which is in the museum grounds, and we're representing Stonegate by the stone path because that's always been. A stone.
Okay,
It's got key features that illustrate. I've always done that, and people then can recognise a town.
Yeah, and the river, of course, as well. Yeah. Yes, I've seen a few locals coming around going, "Oh, I recognise that." Yeah. So we've got the Vikings attacking,
and the Saxons under Eller and Offa had fallen out, so they're taking their retinues away. So there really is only a small number of troops in York at this period.
Oh, okay.
There's about 90 Saxon figures against 240 Vikings.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's really, population is about 10,000 at that time.
Right.
So it is only a small local garrison, really.
Okay, right. So looking around the table at some of the bits on there, the buildings and things, are they from various manufacturers?
Yes, there's Village Green, there's Adrian's Walls, Gallia. That's mostly it. Normally, when I have other periods, there's more different ones, but these are, that's mainly. Oh, and there's some Gripping Beast as well.
Yeah. Are they Gripping Beast longboats as well?
No. They're Village Green are the smaller ones, and the big ones are Adrian's Walls.
Is it? Right, okay. And all the trees look like Last Valley
a lot of them, and a few others thrown in, yes.
And is there a variety of different manufacturers with the figures?
Yes. I've put on the flip, but there's Asgard, there's Viking miniatures from the 70s. Some of these figures are 40 odd years old.
Are they? Right.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So we've got
and there's modern ones in as well.
Yeah.
Gripping Beast. There's Asgard, Gripping Beast, minifigs, Essex.
Yeah.
Wargames Foundry.
Do you put game on every year?
Yes.
And is it usually a local interest thing?
I try and do something like Jacobite Rebellion, English Civil War, 7 Years War periods.
Right.
You name it, I can put it on in that period though.
Right, okay. Right, well, thanks very much for showing us around. Thank you. We're now with John from the Harrogate Wargames Club, and we're looking at it's clearly a Romans versus Britons or Celts in general.
Yeah, ancient Britons. The tribes are revolting. Romans have been sent out to sort of restore order, and that's the game.
And the interesting thing for me here is the rules that you're using, which is is it new or forthcoming?
Forthcoming, yes. So we've got we've been working with Rich, helping him playtest it. So we've got a playtest version. So we've been sort of doing that ourselves, and then brought this out and played a couple of games with other people in public, as it were.
So that's Rich Clark.
Two Fat Lardies. Yes.
So it's a Two Fat Lardies game.
Yeah.
Is it in the spirit of Two Fat Lardies games in general?
Very, very much so. So it's card activation. It's about leaders and big men activating groups. You've got lots of friction. So it's got a lot of the sharp practice DNA in terms of the way it operates. But also it's got some, I was going to say subtle, but maybe not so subtle differences. So the way the command cards used in this game are very different. So they allow you to activate abilities. So your Romans can use their cards to activate drills. So they can if they're getting shot at by slingers, they can use a car to bring the shields up, which gives them a bit of protection. They can brace the shields if they're about to be attacked. The barbarians tend to use their command cars to activate ambushes. So the Romans are, certainly in this where we've got the Romans advancing into barbarian territory, a lot of the woods and the various other terrain pieces will have a deployment or an ambush point, and then the Brits can, or the barbarians can then ambush or deploy. So the Romans are very much sort of moving through unfriendly territory, and if they get ambushed, it hurts.
Okay, right, good. And it's got a suitably silly name, like.
Yeah, I think infamy because they're all got an infamy. Yeah. I think Richard talked about having a more sensible name, but I think generally everybody said no. Actually, it suits the Lardy way of doing things. But actually, having said that, while it's got an amusing name, I think the beauty of a lot of the Lardy rules and these rules as well, Infamy, is that there's an awful lot of research goes into it. I mean, what Rich has done is he's gone right back. He's done a lot of reading, and I think one of the things I like, which I've not seen before, is barbarians aren't just barbarians. Your ancient Britons will fight very differently from your ancient Germans. We've got the way that chariots work. Spent a lot of time in terms of that. So you don't have your chariots charging in, but your chariots are very mobile. But what they can do is they deploy troops. The troops can jump out of the chariots, and then the chariots actually then form a rally point. So if the British troops are beaten, rather than fleeing, they will flee back to the chariots, jump in the chariots. It'll help them to rally the shock off, and then they can be a bit more effective. So it's little things like that where he's really tried to bring the flavour of the period and the troops, as much as we know about it, be as historically accurate as we possibly can be.
Very good. Just tell us a bit about the figures on the table. Are they which manufacturer?
They're all Wargames Foundry. So they're a bit of an old range now, but it's the old Perry range for their Imperial Romans, and their Celts. They're beautiful figures, and they've been around for a long time now, but I think they stand up with pretty much anything that's available in the market. They're lovely figures.
How about the buildings?
The buildings. So I've got a British village, which is hovels, which I think are massively underrated because people often don't know about them. But they're resin buildings. They're actually really good value. And I bought those many years ago, painted them up, used a bit of Renedra plastic wattle fencing, based them up, and they're great. We've got a Grand Manor tower, and then the fort was scratch built. So I didn't make it, unfortunately, but somebody built that for me, and it's always been a nice sort of centrepiece. So real mix in terms of the buildings.
Right, well, great. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Your game. Cheers.
Thank you.
So I'm now with Steve from the Brompton Bankers, presenting a Rules of Engagement game. We don't see Rules of Engagement played very often, actually, at shows, but is it that rules you particularly like?
It is, yes. It provides a sort of element of playability and realism as far as you can get anything realistic onto a tabletop.
Yeah.
You find that your units often sort of suffer through suffering hits rather than taking casualties.
Right.
So it's more of a morale-based game than a simply sort of killing off anybody that happens to be in line of fire.
Okay, right. But you have had to tweak it a bit because there's something a bit unique about this game, in so much as it's three forces fighting each other.
Yes. The justification we have for this is because after the Soviets invaded Poland on 17 September of 1939, first off, although they'd agreed a demarcation line with the Germans to where the partition of Poland was intended to be, the maps of the period weren't terribly reliable. And so where the demarcation line would have been varied according to what map you were looking at. Of course, the other thing is that the Russians and the Germans, although they're nominally allied, would not have shared communications, would not have shared intelligence with each other, particularly at the sort of tactical level which we're looking at here. So, for the purposes of the game, although the Poles are fully aware that the Germans and the Russians are hostile to them, for the Germans and the Russians, we have to test against the experience values of our troops to see whether they identify, say the Germans identify the Russians as hostile or as allies. And if they identify them as hostiles, the chances are they will start shooting at each other.
got some refugees caught up there.
We have, yes.
And who are the figures by? Are they various manufacturers, or is it generally
Largely Warlord's bolt action range. Certainly virtually all the German infantry, all of the Poles, and most of the Russians of that. I think Gus has mixed in a few of the sort of Bad Squiddo games as female figures into his Russian squads. And I've got my 2 German tanks are both Blitzkrieg miniatures.
Right.
So resin castings.
Nice buildings as well. Do you know where they come from?
Yeah, for the most part they are Sarissa, which is the majority of the buildings on the table at the moment. There are a couple of Charlie Foxtrots, they're all MDF. So a couple of Charlie Foxtrot buildings in there as well. And I think, if I remember correctly, the pigsty and the chicken house over towards the far end of the table where I'm standing at the moment are from a firm in Poland which Bob was tracked down. He's the owner of the Polish forces here.
Well, it's certainly an interesting game.
Yes.
And you're having fun playing it?
We are, yes.
Good, well that's what it's all about.
That's right.
Right, thanks for showing us around.
You're very welcome, thank you.
This video has been brought to you by WI Prime, Wargames Illustrated Magazine's online members club. View more videos or find out more about WI Prime by following these links.